Okay, today we're going to finish up our last little bits of our quilt, and we're going to start by making a couple little 6.5-inch blocks. They are going to look like this, and let's go ahead and get some made. First thing I'm going to do is lay out on my design board all the pieces and where they're going to end up on our quilt. And I'm just going to kind of play with the arrangement. Okay, that looks good. And then we're just going to go ahead and start piecing, and I'm going to join these two together, then work on these two, these two, these two, and then we'll just keep adding. And I'm just going to do a finger press here, and then when it's all done, I'll go do a final press on it. And then I'm going to go ahead and add this row. Okay, we got our little center part of our block done, and now we're going to add this piece here. And then our last bit here at the top. Okay, I'm going to give that a final press with the iron, and then this is ready to be added on to our borders, and then we can go ahead and get our borders on our quilt. Okay, I've got my top and bottom borders here, and I'm going to add my block, and I just want to make sure when I'm doing this that these two are actually going to match. That seam there should line up, and that my little bit larger square here is in the corner facing out. So you kind of want to make sure it's oriented like this. And then that, again, that seam will line up, but there's no other seams. So we'll just put that on there and sew one to each side. Again, just making sure it's oriented correctly. And then when we do that, it will look like this, where it's sewn on, okay? And I have already added the borders to the side. And then now I'm gonna go ahead and show how I added the border. And we're gonna do it with this top one here. So the first thing, I'm going to kind of try to find the center. So I just did a little finger crease there. I'm just kind of eyeballing where the center is just to get a general idea. I'm going to put a pin there. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to line up my very ends. Okay, and stick a pin there. And now we will have a few places right here on this last border where we're going to match up some seams. So this seam here, the first seam with our outer blocks there, that pieced, that will line up, so we can put a pin there. And then the seam where we've joined our block to the border will line up with the seam on our quilt where the side border was attached. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of flatten it out and just kind of give it a little tug to make sure it's all laying flat, and then we'll put some pins in there. Okay, so that side is done. And we'll work on this section, same thing. So I'm going to line up this corner. And then there's a seam right here that's going to line up. And then the seams where I added the block to the border, and then where the border gets added to the quilt on the side, that seam there will line up. And then just make sure these are all laying flat. And I'm just going to stick one here in the center. Okay, and then just using a 1/4 inch seam, we're going to go ahead and attach that. Okay, here I've added my vintage ironing board just to give myself like a shelf to hold the bulk of my quilt on as I'm adding these borders. Once the pieces get larger and larger and larger, and it's a lot to hang on, and I don't want it pulling or dragging or falling off my sewing area, so I just lay it up here, and that kind of just acts as a shelf. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew this border on. Okay, now I'm going to press that border, and I'm just going to do like a heat set on my seam before I okay, so I've kind of heat set that, and then now I'm going to just kind of kind of nudge it with my fingers. I want my seam to go to the outside, so facing that outside border. So I'm just making sure it's all in place where I want it to be, and then I'll come back over with the iron. And just do that all the way along. Oh, that looks so good. So exciting. All right, we've got one more thing to do. We're just going to add a small border all the way along the outer part here. And that's the reason I like to add a little border at the very end all the way around is just so that it locks in every one of these seams. I'm not going to have anything trying to come apart. It also gives my binding a place to kind of float on. I don't want my binding cutting off, you know, parts of my piecing. If I had points there, you know, my binding might come over and then cut that off. So if I give it a little border, the binding just kind of floats on that. It makes like a nice little frame that says, you know, look at the inside of my pretty quilt. So I'm going to get that added on next.